think I moved the lectern so I can speak in the middle and see you as well. So I think we've done it. Thank you. Can I start with thanking everybody here? And I say that with reason, actually, because I hear the dissatisfaction around progress, George, and around speed. And sometimes I share that as well, because everybody here is incredibly passionate about what we're hearing about today. I mean, look at this crowd, for God's sake. It's extraordinary. But if you think in terms of how fast the wonderful system moves and how fast medicine moves, you know, you have made an amazing contribution, because if we think in terms of when we started the progress, and I'm going to talk about risk reduction now in particular, towards risk reduction really started. It was only in 2013, 2014 that we came out of the Blackfriars Consensus, which started to talk about the fact that dementia wasn't an inevitable part of aging. Now, that may seem to you like millions of years ago, but it took about 30 years, and it takes about 30 years for medicine to sort of change a little bit. And in 5 years, things have started to change, at least. I know they're not as fast as we'd like to, and this little presentation is going to be perhaps a mixture of things that have gone better than expected and things that have not gone as fast as we would have hoped for. But I think this is a journey and this is a movement, as is clear, and this is something we're going to keep on working on for the rest of our natural lives. I hope not our children, but certainly we're going to work on for the rest of our natural lives. So a lot has been described already, so I'm not going to show you stuff you know already. You've heard all this stuff before, and you've heard all about the scale of the challenge as well. We know how difficult this is really. I would only say it could be significantly more difficult for us. I've been to places not very long ago, like in Japan, where they really have fallen off the demographic cliff in terms of the number of older people with no young people around. So, you know, we're aging, but some places are aging far faster than we are. So really, this is the start of that discussion around getting to a stage where we start to show how we're doing, because I think it's really important, certainly if we think in terms of risk reduction, I think there are two little bits we got to consider. One is, or two big bits. One is the people who are providing the care, and the other is the people who are not only receiving, but participating in the care. And if we look at the bits around who is providing the care, this is the fingertips stuff, which is published by Public Health England, available to everybody, where you can compare the care where you are against the care where other people are. And I think it's really quite useful to do that. Certainly useful for you, so you know how good the services are in your area compared to others, and also useful in terms of ammunition, should you need it to challenge, or ammunition, should you need it to complement, because sometimes you need to do both at the same time. As we heard already, the tool indicators are in 6 domains. Prevalence we've heard an awful lot about, but preventing well, diagnosing well, living well, supporting well, and dying well are the other little bits. And each of those bits is actually in a pivot table. You can compare one area with another. You can compare progress. And I think we have made significant progress in terms of getting people to understand that risk reduction is real in dementia. We heard earlier that WHO is also doing some work around this, and we're expecting some further WHO publications towards the end of this year, beginning of next year, around risk reduction, where England is part of the leadership around that, and that's really good. Not because it's nice to be jumping up and down and saying we're in the leadership, but what's happening is this is becoming a global movement. So the stuff which we're doing is also happening in a whole host of other places. And that, I think, is really good news. Wow, it's working. But we haven't really managed the inequalities thing as well. We still have significant issues around the inequalities. There are still We know, for example, that prevalence is much higher in women than in men. The difference is really quite significant. I mean, 62% to 38% is pretty high. And also, they're more likely amongst carers. And the prevalence is much higher amongst those of lower socioeconomic status. And I think we now understand a little bit more of that, perhaps, than we did. The Lancet Commission, which came out last year, looked at all the things which could potentially affect dementia, and education is a protective factor, and clearly there's an association between education and socioeconomic class. This could well have something to do with it. When we come to the BME groups, of course, that is another matter. Perhaps there are also genetic factors here at stake, but the differences, again, are quite stark. 6.1% to 2.2%. Those are big differences we have to contend with. We are doing quite a bit with our colleagues. This is all about partnership at the end of the day. The little group that deals with dementia within Public Health England is ever so small. I think there are about 3 people, of which there's another person here somewhere. I don't know where Sue is. Oh, there she is. Hello. That's Sue. That's the person who does most of the work around dementia. So it's really the work of one person transmitted and working through partners, because that's the only way we can actually make something happen. But this is where perhaps there's much more work we need to do, and it's really in public perceptions around dementia risk, because even though we're sort of getting the profession to accept, the professions to accept that risk reduction is real and there are things they can do, perhaps we haven't got that message to the public yet quite as well as we could have. And we did a social attitude survey to really look at this, and found that really only a minority of people were aware of the following risk factors, like drinking heavily, smoking, which still surprises me that people think that there's no association. It's only 28% of people who thought there was an association. And high blood pressure. So people still think to a degree that dementia is something which sort of happens and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And this is where we're putting an awful lot of our work and our efforts over the next year or two to try to actually move that, because I think there's things we can do to make a difference and to make things move a little bit faster than they are at the moment. We know all about what's good for the heart is good for the brain. Certainly the people here know all about it. I wish the people out on the Clapham omnibus knew the same as the people here about this, but this is a movement, as I said, we need to continue around the fact that we could delay or even avoid as many as a third of all cases of dementia, which is a significant number, of course. We've done a lot of media work as well with people like Angela Rippon. You're going to get these slides home, so it may be worth having a look at the clips. They're really good fun. They're very useful also to transmit to other people should you wish to. And having somebody who can speak like Angela Rippon rather than me say them makes much more sense. People listen to her more than me. They say she's got better legs than I do anyway. So if we think in terms of how to protect against dementia, I think we mentioned these things before. It really is important to remain connected, because social isolation, going into yourself, is really part of a process which a lot of people start to develop the moment they stop working, and remaining engaged is really quite important. Because we've talked about it quite a bit, that becoming socially isolated the moment you retire is probably equivalent to taking up smoking and the effect it has upon your health. This is really bad news. And so there's, we must do everything possible to assist people in not becoming socially isolated, and also in challenging themselves. I mean, I'm 64 years old. I should be retiring. I'm just about to start another new job. I think it's great. People don't quite appreciate the health value of working. It gives you meaning and purpose when you wake up in the morning. It gives you not only something to do, but something meaningful to do and something to strive for. So all these things are incredibly important, and I think we need to talk about them far more. This isn't only about pills and medicines. I think it's more about a way of life and a way of living. You all believe in a movement, which is why you're here. So I think the more you transmit that, the quicker we're going to get those numbers up in terms of the people who perhaps aren't quite as aware of the fact they can manage their health and care a little bit better than they do. So some of the stuff we're doing is around the dementia, around the NHS Health Check. We did some pilots together with the Alzheimer's Society and Alzheimer's Research UK. Actually, we did it through them, in terms of partnership. And they really helped design the program themselves. And what we did in these pilots was make people aware of the risk factors of dementia from the age of 40, rather than from the age of 60. The health checks, as you know, are available to people every few years in England, people who aren't in contact with the health services. And in the past, what we're doing is that we were really talking about dementia and also assessing to a degree around dementia in the health checks of people over 60. But we know that the greatest, if we're going to have a real chance of actually forestalling this condition, what we need to do is actually start a little bit earlier. If possible, we've got to start from birth, of course, but the first and most important piece is starting in midlife. And starting in midlife means that we can take up opportunities in the 40s when we start doing the health check to really highlight those risks. And we did that work in pilots, and it was exceptionally well received. So well received that we took it back to the Expert Scientific Committee advisory panel, which exists within Public Health England, to recommend that this is included in the NHS Health Check for the over 40s, and that was submitted to the Parliamentary Under-Secretary for Public Health, and we are now waiting for when that's going to be changed into legislation. In other words, where this is going to happen. This is now a matter of time before this happens to everybody in England. So this is really good news. And even though a little bit of progress is progress, actually, because we are getting a little bit further along this road. And what we're also starting to do is really starting to catch up with the 21st century, where perhaps digital methods of communication, digital extenders of clinical practice are going to be commoner. So we're doing quite a bit of thinking around how to get online dementia awareness resources there in a way where people can understand them, where people accept them, and really with a very public-facing rather than profession-facing approach. Whoops. So these are all the other little bits of information which we publish around risk reduction. There's a whole host of data, a whole host of leaflets, a whole host of online activities and online resources which are available for people, and they are very easy to find, actually. And we're also doing some work around carers, because we know that perhaps that is an area where we haven't done as much as we should have, all of us. I think the Alzheimer's Society did the right thing in terms of extending the I statements to include carers. And I think we all got to be thinking in terms of carers far more than perhaps we have. We had to start somewhere. We started with people with, who are living with dementia. But I think the time is right now for us to be thinking in terms of carers as well, because clearly not only is their contribution enormous, but it's also really quite incumbent on us, I think, to look after people who have devoted their lives to caring for others. So I think this is an area of work we're going to see more progress in, and certainly more action in over the next year or two. But I want to finish on something which is really important. Two things, really. One, around the workplace, because I was also struck by what George said at the beginning of the meeting today. George, you said you want to live life the way you choose to. And I think that should include the workplace, because all too often what seems to happen is that the moment somebody gets diagnosed with a condition, they think that work is something which used to happen rather than happens. And we also now know how beneficial to health and wellness work is. So denying work to people on the basis of this diagnosis, I believe, is just not right. And I really think this is something we really all need to start getting upset about. Because we need to put pressure for this to stop. This is not acceptable. There are ways in which people can transition from jobs which perhaps they can't feel capable of doing anymore or confident of doing to jobs which they can feel confident of doing. There are some real examples around this. In my bizarre life, I also was medical director of the British Armed Forces for a while. I have no idea why. That's another story. So I was medical director of the armed forces in Germany, and there's one thing I really learned, there's one thing they really do very, very well, and it's transition people through their life course. Normally, when you become a soldier, you're trained for years and years and years with big packs of rocks on your back, running up hills and running down hills. Now that does terrible things to your knees. They basically practically fall apart by the age of 40 if you do it well. The weight on your shoulder and running isn't particularly good. But instead of doing what a lot of employers do in England, when people get perhaps a little bit old or a little bit sick, which is really get them to think of moving away, what the armed forces do is actively transmission them. And by that I mean they put in packages for people who have done a few years running up and down hills with rocks on their backs. And really, one, value what they've done, and secondly, put them in a position where they use that experience, and it is an experience actually doing it, to good use, helping other people. So they basically take somebody, a young workforce, and turn them into a late middle-aged workforce, and then turn them into an older workforce, and do that without people feeling devalued because they couldn't do what they used to do before. I think we have an awful lot to do here because we haven't really grasped that quite as much as other countries have. You can tell we haven't if you look at our productivity. And we have to be thinking economically as well, because wealth is health as well. It's part of the same story. This isn't only about pills. So, you know, giving people meaningful employments, giving people the opportunity to feel, again, meaning and purpose is particularly important. And I think workforce is something we need to concentrate on, and we will be doing quite a bit on over the next few years, because I think it's part of risk reduction. And finally, really, we need to go beyond the disease and start thinking of the person. And if there's one thing which we've learned over the last few years from our colleagues around the world, is that in the West, we're not really good at thinking about people. We're really good at thinking about diseases. But then we have to put them back together into people. And it doesn't work very well, which is why we have all the difficulties which were alluded to earlier in terms of the disassociation in health and social care. If you go to other parts of the world, they think of people first, and then they think of diseases. We need to start thinking that way, not the way we have all learned in medicine. That's the way I was taught medicine anyway. And we've got to start thinking in terms of productive, healthy aging. Aging is something which is valuable. It's not the grey tsunami which is just about to kill us all. Older people are just as productive as younger people, just in a different way. They understand nuance better. They may not be as good as doing musculoskeletal tasks as younger people, but we don't necessarily value those as much as the nuance. So this is a talk about risk reduction. This isn't a talk about aging, but I think dementia, we need to be thinking in dementia in the context of a productive, healthy age, not in the context of anything else. And I think that's the message which I believe is so important. Thank you.